The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, polished marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, velvet armchairs that swallowed you whole, and gold-framed paintings worth more than an ordinary family's lifetime savings. But into this world of extravagance walked a woman who didn't belong, or so it appeared. Her shoes were worn, the edges of her dress frayed, and her hands carried the quiet story of a life not spent on luxury but on labor. She paused, nervous yet determined, at the front desk of the city's most opulent hotel. The receptionist, dressed in a crisp uniform with a name tag that glistened, looked up, her painted smile fading into disdain the moment her eyes scanned the woman before her. Then, in a tone sharp enough to cut through the grand silence of the lobby, she said words that echoed like a slap, "You're too poor for this hotel. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that dignity should never be judged by appearance, take a moment now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel Kindness Tales." Stories like this remind us that behind every face lies a truth far deeper than what meets the eye. The woman's name was Clara, and though she looked fragile standing there in her faded dress, she was anything but weak. She had lived through storms most couldn't imagine, loss, betrayal, poverty, and the heavy burden of being underestimated her whole life. On that morning, she had come not to beg or plead but to stay at the very hotel her husband had once built from the ground up with his sweat and vision. Only now, he was gone, taken by illness, and Clara, in her grief, wanted to step into his world, to feel closer to him by walking through the halls he had poured his soul into. She had lived simply, away from the glamour, never craving wealth. Her husband, Richard, had respected that, always telling her that her humility was what kept his feet on the ground even as his business soared. But he had never told his employees who she was. Clara had preferred to remain unseen, watching from afar. Today, for the first time, she came as a guest. But the receptionist's cold dismissal struck her like a dagger. People in the lobby turned, some whispering, some smirking, their eyes heavy with judgment. Clara felt the heat of humiliation rise to her cheeks. She wanted to turn away, to flee before tears betrayed her, but something in her heart resisted. She thought of Richard, of how he always told her, "Never let anyone make you feel small, Clara. You are more than they can ever see." The receptionist leaned forward, her tone dripping with mockery as she added, "Rooms here start at more than you probably make in a year. This isn't a shelter. Perhaps you should try somewhere, more affordable." She turned to her computer screen as if Clara had ceased to exist. Clara stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. Memories rushed back, of her younger days when she had worked 2 jobs just to pay rent, when people in stores had treated her like she didn't belong because she couldn't dress the way others did. She thought she had left those days behind, but here she was, judged once again. What none of these strangers knew was that the very walls surrounding them, the chandeliers above their heads, and the salaries that paid the staff were all fruits of her late husband's vision, and she was the rightful owner now, though she had never flaunted the title. At that moment, Clara's grief transformed into resolve. She stood taller, her voice quiet yet firm, and asked to see the manager. The receptionist rolled her eyes, whispering to her colleague with a smirk, "She's wasting her time." Minutes later, the manager, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, approached with polite curiosity. But when Clara introduced herself fully, revealing her last name, Hamilton, the same Hamilton etched in gold letters across the hotel entrance, the manager's face drained of color. Gasps rippled across the lobby. The receptionist's smirk faltered, her jaw slackening in disbelief. The truth hung heavy in the air. The woman they had mocked as too poor was in fact the widow of the man who had built the empire they worked for, and by legal right, the very owner of the hotel itself. Clara didn't raise her voice, didn't throw her authority like a weapon. Instead, she simply said with heartbreaking calm, "This place was built on kindness and hard work. Richard believed in giving people chances, not humiliating them. It saddens me to see how quickly that spirit has been forgotten." The silence that followed was deafening. Guests shifted uncomfortably, and staff avoided her eyes. The receptionist's face burned crimson, and for once her sharp tongue was stilled. Clara could have fired her on the spot, but as she looked at the young woman, she saw not just cruelty but also fear, the fear of someone who had learned to measure others by wealth because she believed wealth defined survival. Clara remembered her own days of desperation and chose compassion over revenge. Still, she made it clear, kindness was not optional here. She announced then and there that the hotel would undergo changes, starting with retraining staff on dignity, respect, and service rooted in humanity, not judgment. Luxury means nothing if it strips people of their worth, she said softly, her words carrying more weight than any display of anger could have. Over the next weeks, Clara immersed herself in the hotel, learning the operations, walking the halls, and quietly observing the staff. Some embraced her vision eagerly, while others struggled to unlearn old habits. She implemented policies that ensured not just guests but also employees were treated with dignity. She introduced scholarships for staff children, improved working conditions, and insisted that every guest, whether arriving in a limousine or on foot, was greeted with the same respect. Word spread quickly, not just of the incident in the lobby but of the transformation Clara was leading. The story of the poor-looking woman who turned out to be the owner's wife captured public imagination, stirring conversations about judgment, wealth, and humanity. Guests came not only for the luxurious rooms but also for the warmth and inclusivity the hotel was becoming known for. As for the receptionist, Clara chose not to dismiss her immediately. Instead, she gave her a choice, to stay and truly learn what it meant to serve with compassion or to leave if she could not change. At first, the young woman resisted, embarrassed by her exposure. But over time, something shifted. She saw Clara treat janitors with the same respect as millionaires, watched her sit with staff during lunch breaks, and realized kindness wasn't weakness, it was strength. Slowly, the hardness in her began to crack. Clara herself found healing in this journey. Losing Richard had left her hollow, but stepping into his world and shaping it with her own values gave her purpose again. Every kind word exchanged in those halls, every staff member whose life improved, every guest who left feeling respected, it all became her way of honoring him. She realized that wealth wasn't about marble floors or golden chandeliers, it was about the lives touched, the dignity restored, and the love carried forward. Months later, Clara stood in the same lobby where she had once been humiliated. But this time, she was surrounded by warmth. Staff greeted her not out of fear, but with genuine respect. Guests smiled as they passed, many recognizing her story. The chandeliers still sparkled, the marble still gleamed, but what shone brightest was the humanity that had been restored within those walls. And as Clara looked around, she whispered to herself, "Richard, we've done it. This is what you would have wanted." If this story has touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Kindness Tales. Your support helps spread more stories that remind us of the power of compassion, second chances, and seeing beyond appearances. Before we end, I have a special request. Comment below with the words, "Kindness wins," if you believe that no one should ever be judged by their appearance or their wallet. Because in the end, life's greatest luxury is not found in hotels or wealth, it's found in the simple act of treating each other with dignity. And that is a treasure no money can ever buy.